Thank you for that welcome. My name is Nigel Henderson. I'm a Great War obsessive, I think is the official title. There's going to be two talks in this, as has been said. Today's talk will be looking at how to research an individual and using a number of different sources to try and track down where an individual is buried. And the second part of the talk will look at some case studies of men that are buried in and around Belfast. Next week's talk will be slightly different in that it'll be based on trying to do group research. For example, if somebody was wanting to do research on where men from the 6th Battalion Royal Irish Rifles are buried, how to go about identifying that. Or, as is something which I did recently, if you're going on holiday and you're going to somewhere like Malta and you want to visit the graves, cemeteries in Malta where Irishmen or Ulstermen are buried, I'll show how you can use what's on Commonwealth War Graves to identify everyone that's buried in Malta and then filter down to pick out people who can be identified as Irishmen or Ulstermen, depending on what you want to do. So that's what the two talks will cover. The second talk, there will be case studies of men who are buried in Ulster but outside of Belfast. And that might be Ballymena, Londonderry. I haven't picked them yet. So, if you bear with me on that. About me, as I said, my name is Nigel Henderson. My primary area of interest in the Great War is Belfast Presbyterians in the Great War. One, because I'm a Presbyterian, and two, because at the end of the First World War, the Presbyterian Church produced a very extensive volume of all men and some women who served in the Great War by congregation. It's not complete, as I'm sure Eddie will agree with me, but it is a very good starting point. For congregations, each congregation is asked to make a return, and it will generally have the name, surname, forename, where they lived, what their rank was, what regiment they were in, and whether they died, whether they were wounded, whether they were taken prisoner, whether they got any awards, and so forth. At the minute, I think my list for the Belfast Presbyterians is sitting at about 10,500 men, and that covers the Belfast Presbytery as it was at the time, not as it is now. Second area that I've been interested in, which led on from the first area, is looking at what's in the newspapers. And I've got a handout which I can give you access to a handout which has links to my websites and stuff. I started going through the Belfast Telegraph to find photographs of men on my Belfast Presbyterians list, and in doing so I decided, well, I may as well keep the ones that aren't, because other people want them, and I currently have about 10,700 servicemen photographs from the First World War. Not necessarily all from Belfast, not necessarily all unionist. I've also then used the Northern Whig in the newsletter, but the Northern Whig probably least of all. Newsletter I've used quite a bit because it is online via Ancestry. I haven't looked through the Irish news, although I was looking in the Irish news for some information for this talk. And whilst they do have coverage of the war and they do have biographies of men buried or men killed or wounded, it's probably not as extensive as information that's in the Belfast newsletter. For the Belfast newsletter, I've downloaded the Ulster War column for the entire war year period, or certainly from November 1914 to August 1919, and that contains biographical information about individuals. Third area that I'm involved in at the minute is war graves in Ulster, which is, I suppose, why I'm here. Started off with a throwaway comment by somebody that said, wouldn't it be great if? We're looking at trying to build up a digital archive of all men from the 9 counties of all men who are buried in the 9 counties of Ulster as a result of either the Great War or the Second World War. So, some of the online research facilities that I'll be looking at today. Commonwealth War Graves Commission is probably the start point for most cases because it has probably a wider range of information than other sources. Linked into the Commonwealth War Graves Commission is the War Graves Photographic project, which, as it says, is a project that's looking to have a photograph for all war graves. It's not complete and it's not free. If you find a war grave and they've got a picture of the grave shown on the headstone, they will give you free of charge the photograph for a donation of £3.50. We're looking at ancestry, and within ancestry we're looking at soldiers died in the Great War, Ireland's Memorial Records, which is a fantastic artistic document, but is not complete and is not accurate. In Ireland Memorial Records, the approach was if somebody died serving in an Irish regiment, they were deemed to be Irish. And certainly in the 16th Irish Division and the Ulster Division, a lot of men were drafted into those divisions from English regiments and had never set foot probably in Ireland. Also, there are a lot of men that aren't included who served with some of the colonial I forgot what the word for them is now, Dominion forces. Looking very briefly at service pension records, or Ancestry also has service pension records where they still exist. Both First World War estimates vary, but probably between 60 and 80% of the war service records for the Great War were destroyed in the Second World War. Some people say 60%, some people say 80%. Metal Index Cards Register is on Ancestry, and also Silver War Badge Registers are on Ancestry. Those are all useful. Silver War Badge Register is probably more useful for people who survived and were discharged due to wounds or illness, because it can tell you when they were discharged, but also when they enlisted. We'll also look very briefly at the Belfast City Council cemetery records, because men who were discharged and then died, whether of war-related wounds or not, some churches would still have them listed on their memorial as being a fatality of the war. So you may be working from a church war memorial and you can't find any information on a certain person. It's possible they were discharged and later died, and the church decided that they were a war fatality rather than Commonwealth war graves. And I might do a wee bit on General Records Office if we still have time. Has anyone used the General Records Office website? It's very good. Although it's somewhat strange that you can only search by periods of 5 years, which means if you're not sure when somebody was born, you have to do multiple searches. But
and that you have to sort of register your interest to do it.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, today, if anyone wants to stop me and ask questions or clarify them, please do so. We want this to be quite flexible and interactive. Certainly, I found the General Records Office quite good. You do have to pay to get the full details, but if you're just interested in finding out when the person was born, you can get to a certain point without having to pay for it, and that will give you usually the date of birth and the mother's maiden name. But if you needed to know the mother's forename and the father's forename, then you'd have to pay. But I think each
there is a trick around that. If you've got the surname of the child and the mother's name, you can generally do a general search and find a relative.
Right, okay. Well,
So,
Eddie, you'll be wanting to, this is Eddie Conley, by the way. If anyone has ever followed Eddie's extracts, that's the man. Even if you haven't, he's still the master. Okay? So we're going to move on now to actually looking at how to do the searches. And as I said, I haven't printed out, I've printed out one copy of my notes. But if anybody else wants a copy, I can email them to them in PDF format. I think that's probably easiest. Also over there, I've got 5 sheets, but I don't know if we'll be needing all 5. Whereas if you want to get more information about an individual, you can put your name down and I'll do a quick search. So, I'm going to come out of PowerPoint and go into our trusted. I hope that it works. This is Commonwealth War, and on my handout I've got the URLs for all the websites that I'm looking at. So if you want a copy, you can get that, and then you can look them up yourself. Commonwealth War Graves, as I said, would probably be the place where most people start. It is a very good resource, and as you can see, you can put in, and they have changed it recently and then changed it back again. No, they changed it back again because you now can't put in surname and forename separately. Once they changed it so you can only put in a name, and you're expected to put in the forename and the surname. But if you've got somebody who's called Robert, the Robert could be a forename or it could be a surname. And you ended up getting a list of anyone with Robert as a forename and anyone with Robert as a surname. So you're then having to filter at a lower level. They have changed that recently. You can put in the country. You can select by country, so if you wanted to, you could find out anyone who was buried in Egypt. And let's just stick with World War I. And that will give you 14,833 names. A great wee tip is to use the download facility. If you download it, it'll download it in what's called comma separated variable format, which comes straight into Excel. Each piece of information will come in as a separate column, which means you can then filter to look for information. That's what I'll be covering more next time. No, you don't necessarily need to know where they're at. I'm just using that as an example. Let's say you were going to Egypt for a holiday and you wanted to visit cemeteries. That would be a good starting point, because then you could pick out all the people who died in Egypt and then filter down to identify all the men from, say, the Royal Irish Rifles, which we'll just do. This is going to be a bit ad hoc as well, so I hope you can all be here till about 5 o'clock. So of that, whatever it was, there's 20 Royal Irish Riflesmen buried in Egypt, or memorialised in Egypt if there wasn't a body. You can also specify by the locate or where the person came from. So United Kingdom forces takes in obviously Great Britain and Ireland. Australian forces, New Zealand, Canadian. Canadian forces also takes in Newfoundland. Although technically in the First World War, Newfoundland was a separate dominion. It also takes in Indian forces and South African forces. It doesn't have men who died serving with something like the West Indian regiments. I don't know how you track those. Never tried. You can also define it by whether they're Army, Air Force, Navy, Merchant Navy, Civilian or Miscellaneous. Miscellaneous would take in the likes of voluntary aid detachment personnel, whereas somebody working, or a nurse with the Queen Alexandra Imperial Medical Nursing Service would be classified as being Army. You can put in by unit, although the unit reference is not always held. There's not always information in the unit reference. You can put in by rank, but you've got to bear in mind that your grandmother may have told you that your grandfather was a corporal, but he might have been an acting corporal and actually a private. And if you put in Corporal Jones, Corporal Jones, had to be, didn't it? You won't get a return. You can put in the service number if you know it, which is always quite useful, but bear in mind, service numbers could be the same in a number of different regiments. And you can put in by regiment and secondary regiment. Secondary regiment would be if somebody was attached to, so if somebody was in Royal Irish Rifles but attached to the Royal Irish Fusiliers, you can put that in. I tend not to. I tend to search for the surname and either the initials and forename, and if necessary the regiment, because it can just get a bit weird if you don't do that. A couple of things to bear in mind about the search facility in Commonwealth War Graves. And sorry if this, so we should really have the lights, don't you?
Yeah, I'll get that.
Is that better? Sorry, I should have done that at the start. One thing to bear in mind is, if you're searching, let's say you were searching for Royal Irish Rifles, if you type in, it will start to show you a drop-down list. If you ignore that drop-down list and search without selecting from that drop-down list, you will get 0 records. So, obviously if you were searching for the Royal Irish Rifles and you thought you think there's something wrong there. But if you were searching for an individual and you understood they were in the Royal Irish Rifles and you got 0 records for, say, Campbell Royal Irish Rifles, then you might think, oh, maybe he was in another regiment. And that could take you right off down a totally dead end. You have to select from the drop-down list. I don't know why they've done it that way. So if I now select Royal Irish Rifles from the drop-down list and press enter, there we've got 7,340 casualties.
It would be to simplify the search process on their side.
Yeah, but well, the number of times I would tend to use copy and paste quite a bit. So if I was looking for a number of different men from the Royal Irish Rifles as part of my Great War Belfast research, I would paste that in and then just be changing the surname, and I would be getting results that weren't true. The other thing to bear in mind is it does allow you to search by surname. It will do exactly what you put in. It will not look for variants. If you put in SMITH, it will only return SMITH. Unlike some of the other facilities, like Soldiers Died Great War, which will look for both. Soldiers Died Great War, if you misspell the regiment number, regiment name, it will still find it, most times. And I'll demonstrate that later. If you're searching and you know the guy's surname and his forename, and you put in the surname and then put in John, it will give 0 results because I have the initials radio button set, and it is then looking for somebody with the initials JOHN. So change that to forename. We're getting something more realistic. 259,500 men with the forename John.
Or surname John.
Or surname John, yes, thank you. No, that should just be forename. But we're not going to argue about that. So those are just a couple of the wee things to look out for when you're doing the search on Commonwealth war graves. Let's see something else I've got here. Okay, I'm going to very briefly show you a wee bit about Soldiers Died Great War. I use it through Ancestry. You can buy the Soldiers Died Great War CD-ROM, but I think it's something about 140, 150 quid, which is a lot of money to sell. It is a very good resource, I think. But Eddie is also transcribing the Irish regiments, or is it just the Northern Irish regiments?
The Irish regiments, eventually, the Commonwealth and Ulster Republic got those, was getting the time to do it.
Yeah, it's very time consuming. So this is the Soldiers Died in the Great War on Ancestry. Make sure that you have height advanced display. If you don't, you'll only be able to search for keywords. You won't be able to put in things like the regiment. Whereas with the advanced you'll be able to put in when the person died, maybe when they were born, but you'll also be able to put in their regiment and the regimental number. So if we're working from Commonwealth war graves and we have some, let's say we've got half a dozen men who we think might be the right man, we're then going to be using Soldiers Died Great War to try and narrow that down. And in doing so, you can use the details that you've already got from Commonwealth war graves to narrow down. A couple of things which apply to both Soldiers Died Great War and Ireland Memorial Records. If you put in J. Campbell, I hope this works, it will not give you men with the name John. It'll just, or James, or it will give you James, maybe John is further on down, but it's certainly so far down the list that it's awkward. So I would be very hesitant to put in the initial and the surname. If you don't know the initial, it's easier to leave it out altogether. Or if you don't know the first letter of the forename, it's easy to leave it out altogether. Soldiers Died Great War. In addition to the details you'd expect, it will generally give you the birthplace, the place where he resided, when he enlisted, and where he enlisted. It will also, if necessary, if somebody had joined one regiment and then had been transferred to a second regiment and died serving with that second regiment, it will give you the first regimental details as well. So you may have in your family oral history, yes, your grandfather served with the Royal Irish Rifles and he was killed in France. But if he joined the Royal Irish Rifles, was wounded, and then when he went back to the front was attached to, say, the Royal Enniskillen Fusiliers, he'll be recorded as a Royal Enniskillen Fusilier casualty, fatality. And that's where Soldiers Died Great War can also help to expand that. Also, Soldiers Died Great War will almost always give you the battalion reference, which Commonwealth War Graves will not always have. And it will always give you the forename, which Commonwealth War Graves does not always have. A lot of the fatalities that are listed in Commonwealth War Graves just have an initial. So if you've got something like J, it could be James, it could be Joseph, it could be John, it could be Josiah, it could be Jeremiah, and so forth. So UK Soldiers Died Great War is a way of taking what you think might be right from Commonwealth War Graves and then looking at each case to say, well, is this a more likely match? Is this a more likely match? And we'll be doing that in a couple of live examples if I can move on. One drawback with Soldiers Died Great War is that it only covers fatalities between 1914 and 1919. Commonwealth War Graves classifies a man can be a war fatality if he died of either war-related injuries or war-related illness up to and including the 31st of August 1921. So you've immediately got, I think there's possibly about more than 5,000 men who died after, in 1920 and 1921, who were defined as war fatalities because they had maybe been wounded, came home, and whilst they were at home they subsequently died.
One small comment, Soldiers Died is not complete.
No, sorry, I thought I said at the start of the number.
Yeah.
Sorry, there is no such thing as a complete record, no matter what the source. If anyone says to you, I've got a source that gives every man that died or every man that served, they're either delusional or a liar, or a delusional liar. It's just not possible.
Sorry,
No, quite right. Thank you very much for putting in there, Eddie.
It's just that whenever I put up survey, the last one I did the Fusiliers, I put 5,500 up from Soldiers Died, but there's actually over 7,000 listed.
Well, interestingly, on Commonwealth War Graves, you can do a search for just for the total died in World War I. Mm-hmm. It will give you a figure. If you go in and look at each year, running from 4th of August to the 31st of December 14, and then 1st of January for all the other years, and total them all up, you get a different result. So there's some, it's probably just to do with the way the search engines run, but it can mean that you could miss out on some people. Ireland Memorial Record is very similar to Soldiers Died Great War, and that's probably because Ancestry have standardised the search facility, the front-end search engine. You can search it by name, but you can just easily do that by going into the Liverpool Library and actually going through the book itself. It is a fantastic record, in my opinion, mainly because of the artwork more than anything else. It purports to list all Irishmen that died in the Great War. I don't know whether it has any females on it.
Not to my knowledge. Not
to my knowledge either. But if for no other reason, it's fantastic because of the border, which was done by a guy called Harry Clark. It is just a fantastic piece of art. And as you go through, I'm just going to flip through a couple of pages here. There are about 8 styles that are repeated. In the border you get images like a machine gunner, or I mean, how many websites have you seen that on? Or something similar to that. But it also has things like the cap badges. So you've got the Royal Irish Rifles cap badge there. You've got the Victoria Cross. You've got this very sort of Celtic artistic image of I don't know, an angel, the idea of peace, the Enniskillen Fusiliers cap badge, the sword, which then becomes very reflective in the crosses of honour, or the crosses of sacrifice that Lutyens produced. And basically, the first page is then repeated that way, and then you get it going through. Fantastic piece of work. And this was brought out in 1922.
Harry Clark, do you know any more about Harry Clark?
Yes, I know
Was
two
he
things
defined
about.
as the first, believed to be the first Irish researcher?
No, all he did was the borders. He was an artist.
So he only
All he did was design these borders to go around the outside, which is why anyone can use them now, because it's out of copyright. I checked with the Royal British Legion in Ireland. So going back, we need to shoot on a bit. It has the same sort of format where you can search for different things. It doesn't have quite as much as Soldiers Died Great War, but sometimes if it doesn't have the birthplace on Soldiers Died Great War, it might have it on our memorial record. So that would be my approach. Look at Commonwealth War Graves first, then try going through Soldiers Died Great War. And if you still don't have all you want, then go to our memorial record. The Ireland Memorial Record has also been updated, although not completely, where it's now more easily searchable, but it's a one-field search facility. So let's look for Campbell. Oops. And Irish Fusiliers. And cross fingers. Get 19 results, and what you'll find is when you look at it, it gives the information it has on the side panel. What it does is it takes what was on the original Irish Memorial Record, has not tried, there's been no attempt to rectify and to exclude men who can't be considered to be Irish. And it's then merged that information with what's held in Commonwealth War Graves. So you're getting things like where he's commemorated or buried. If they had thought about it, they could have then also matched it with Soldiers Died Great War and brought in the other information that it has, and you'd have had a more complete record. Again, probably down to either somebody not thinking laterally, or more likely they just didn't have the resources. Last one.
I added that little note that the commemorations are still being completed.
Sorry?
The commemoration.
Yes. Well, actually, on Ancestry now, it's defined as Irish Memorial Record 1914 to 1922. A year ago, you had just seen 1914, 1918. But I'm not sure how they're going to merge that into the actual pages for the, because you can, if you find a relative or a person on Ireland Memorial, you can download the page in which their name appears. So you get the border that goes with it. Another facility is the Belfast City Council burial records. This is good, but it only relates to cemeteries under the council authority. So you'll get Dundonald, you'll get Belfast City Cemetery, you'll get Balmoral, but you won't get Knockbreda, and you won't get Milltown, and you won't get Carnmoney. I don't know why there hasn't been some means of trying to bring in all the others. So let's search for one person here, Robert Ford. If you know the year, you can put that in, but I'm not going to. Oh, yeah. So there's all the men called Robert Ford that died, or and they're buried. You've got Rosedale, you've got Dundonald, you've got City Cemetery, Dundonald. This is the one I want because I know the date, because I did this earlier. So when you, that's not the right button to have clicked on. If you click on the View Details, it will give you his last known address and sometimes where he died. So for example, this guy died in Hilden Hospital in Galwally, but his last known address was at 11 Linfield Street. Died on the 24th of November 1920, and he's buried in the Glenalina Extension City Cemetery in Block P239. If we go back to Commonwealth War Graves, and I realise I'm jumping around here quite a bit, You'll bear with me. So we've got 3 Robert Fords, but none of them died in 1920. So this is a man who had been discharged and subsequently died. He's listed on a Presbyterian Rule of Honour as being a war fatality, but he's not regarded as a war fatality by Commonwealth War Graves. That might be because there's been an omission or an oversight, or more likely he was maybe discharged due to wounds and died of, let's say, flu or a heart attack. So because the cause of his death cannot be linked inextricably to the war, he's not regarded as a war fatality. If somebody had been poisoned gas and had been discharged due to the poison gas and had subsequently died of something like pleurisy or tuberculosis, you can establish a connection, or you might be able to establish a connection, and that sort of person could then be regarded as a war fatality. It seems a harsh that some people aren't and some people are, but they had to draw lines. It's the same as why did they pick 31st of August 1921 as the last date?
An arbitrary date, it has to be set.
An arbitrary date. I mean, you could have gone on and on and on because there are guys who died as a result of their war wounds in the 1930s. Anyway, let's press on. So those are some of the records that are available. And what I'm going to do now is to show an example. Oops, wrong button. Going to see if we can find a John Campbell, nice common name, born in Portadown, who died with the Royal Irish Fusiliers. So we start off here with Campbell. Sorry, the longer I go on, the more my fingers will get jittery. Just to be on the safe side, we'll pick up First World War. And down here, we'll put in Royal Irish Fusiliers. Always use the drop down menu, even if you're searching for a cemetery, use the drop down menu. So we've got 7 records. But as you'll see, as well, although we've specified John as a forename, it's also given you J. Campbell's. It's also given you James's, and if there'd been any Josephs or Jeremiah's or Josiah's or any of those other names, it would have given them as well. What you could do at this stage is to go through each one and see whether any of them match up. If there were too many, you could download the results and use Excel to filter and to search. But I'm going to go through these one at a time. So, this is the son of Henry and Annie from Gerrard's Pass, so he's probably not the person, the right one. We've got this guy, 9th Battalion Royal Irish Fusiliers, but there's no additional information. So he could be the one we're looking for. Again, he's 1st Battalion Royal Irish Fusiliers. Again, he could be the one we're looking for. From Roscommon, so he's out. And he's James. 9th Battalion. 9th Battalion was raised in County Armagh, a good possibility, but we don't have any additional information. But we do now have his regimental number. So if we go to UK soldiers died in the Great War, go into the edit search, and John. And just to show you that it will find things without the correct spelling, I'm going to spell Fusiliers totally incorrectly. And you'll see that the first record picks up 20024 Princess Victoria's Royal Irish Fusiliers. That's the other thing I like about Soldiers Died Great War. It gives you the full regiment name. So you'll have something like the Duke of Albany's, Argyll Sutherland Highlanders, Duke of Albany's, whatever. Princess Victoria's Royal Irish Fusiliers. Sounds a bit better than just Royal Irish Fusiliers. Or you get something like the Leinster Regiment, which is actually the Prince of Wales Canadian
Right. Princess of Wales Royal Canadians.
Yeah, Princess of Wales Royal Canadians brackets Leinster Regiment. But it's so. If we now look at this record, we can see that he was born in Portadown, resided in Portadown, and enlisted in Belfast. So even if you've got a family history that your family's from Belfast, your great-grandfather lived in Belfast when he signed up, but you think he actually came from Portadown, this enables you to tie it down. So going from a record where you didn't even have his forename, all you had was J. Campbell, and you didn't have any details as to where he lived, we now have a perfect match, which gives us where he lived, where he resided, and where he enlisted. Doesn't give when he enlisted, or anything else, and we can see that he was with the 9th Battalion, which was the County Armagh Volunteer Battalion. So that's how you can use Commonwealth War Graves and Soldiers Died Great War to try to hone down. You may end up still with 2 or 3, and they might all be born and ported on. If that's the case, then you can start to maybe go to things like the census returns to see if you can track any of them that way, and then use family information to determine which one is the right one. But if you've just got a birthplace, trying to do that in census can be somewhat problematic. So is everyone with me so far? Right. Anyone got any questions at this stage? Anyone totally baffled by what I've said? No, good. The same information would come up, and I'm going to press on, more or less the same information would come up for if we'd done the same search in Ireland Memorial Records. One that I would like to keep going for something that I think smash, but isn't. I'm going to do another one here, another John Campbell, the guy that's buried down in Jarrett's Pass. And his number, he was also with the Royal Irish Fusiliers, but his number was 18537, I think. This is far too small for my bad eyesight. 18537. So if we'd come to Soldiers Died Great War and search for him, he's not coming up. And believe me, he's not there. I've been down. So for some reason he's not in Soldiers Died Great War. In that case, I would then go to Ireland Memorial Records, and again John Campbell. Royal Irish Fusiliers, 18537. And again, he's not coming up there either. So the only record that he's on is Commonwealth War Graves, but we don't have his forename, but we do have his mother and father's name that came from Jarrett's Pass. So having the mother and father, you can then look in the census to see whether there's a John Campbell whose father was his father was Henry, his mother was called Annie. So with that information, you'd be more able to track him down. But why is he not on those other 2 records? Oversight, omission, who knows?
Possible reason is that he wasn't actually living in Jarrett's Pass at the time and was given his home address at the time.
Yeah, could be.
Therefore, again, this is where, as you say, looking at census records, trying to trace family from help.
But I still would have thought he'd have been in Soldiers Died Great War, because they didn't put in Jarrett's Pass as a criteria.
No.
No, so, but it's one of those things where he's just dropped off the radar, but he is on one of the records, and that's where you'll find that of those 3 records, a lot of them will have common information, common records, but there'll always be some that are on one and not on the other 2, or on one and not on any of the others. So you can use them all. Commonwealth War Graves, I think, has the most complete record, and names are being added to it. There's a guy buried in Clifton Street Graveyard. He's part of the Ewart family who had the mills. He was in the medical corps. He was discharged, subsequently died. But for some reason, the army or the authorities were not aware of his death, or that his death was related to the war, and he ended up not being on Commonwealth War Graves. He now is on Commonwealth War Graves as a recognised war fatality, and people are being added to it literally every year. Sorry, Phil.
I came across Commonwealth graves where they haven't been listed or spelling mistakes, and I basically done the inquiry form. What would you do then for the likes of Ancestry and the Irish Records? Do you then send them an email to say they have been missed off, or do you
Certainly
just
Commonwealth
do you know
War
what
Graves.
comes to you?
Yeah.
Well,
Commonwealth War Graves, you can send in corrections.
Yeah.
How quickly they act on those corrections is another matter, because
6 months
they
ago.
are a voluntary-based organisation, so they just don't have the resources. There are, I mean, I know that, for example, that in Belfast City Cemetery, there are 81 war graves where Commonwealth War Graves has the wrong plot reference, because they didn't realise where Glenalina starts and where Belfast City Cemetery ends. So you get people, and it's just plot J35. So you go to the office, say, can you tell me where J35 is? The guy will show you the map and say, there's plot J35, should be on the perimeter. You can walk around the perimeter as long as you like. You won't find him, because he's buried half a mile away in Glenalina, J35. And that, if somebody is coming over from Canada or Australia or somewhere, because the base data is incorrect, they're going on into a wild goose chase. In Clonus, there's a guy buried in what's called Clonus New Cemetery on Commonwealth War Graves. I went down to try and find his grave, and I asked some people who were there, and I said, where's the new cemetery? They said, oh, you go out around this road and up half a mile and it's on your left. Went there. It was obvious that there was no burials from before 1950 there. On the way back into the town, somewhat seething, and looking for the guy that gave me the directions to tell him off, I spotted another cemetery. Just by chance I stopped, went in, and there he was. He's in, I can't remember what the name of the grave, but it's something like All Saints Roman Catholic Graveyard, or a name like that. They've got the wrong cemetery name on Commonwealth War Graves. Another example is Grey Abbey. If you follow the instructions that Commonwealth War Graves gives you, it takes you to the new cemetery in Grey Abbey and not the Grey Abbey cemetery. So, you know, don't trust anything.
no,
Paranoid. Don't trust anything.
there is not a record set out there that doesn't have errors in it.
Yeah.
Or forms.
Okay. I'm going to press on. I will be around for a while afterwards. If anyone wants to stop and chat about anything that I've covered so far. Right. Greater Belfast. How many cemeteries do you reckon are in Greater Belfast that have Commonwealth War Graves, fatalities in them, and how many war graves? Go on, guess. 6 cemeteries? 6 cemeteries. Okay. Any advance on 6? Do you want to give an estimate of the number of fatalities buried in those 6?
I would have said very little until I went looking for a person we called an uncle, who wasn't an uncle. But in the meantime, he's not a war casualty or anything like that. And when I was there, I discovered rows upon rows upon rows of British war dead. I don't know whether it's World War II or what.
There's actually quite a few Polish war dead buried in North Town. I think there's 7
And the one Middletown, there's a row of
Polish ones. Yeah.
Polish ones as well.
There's also 3 French sailors from the First World War buried in Middletown, and 2 or 3 Norwegian sailors of the Second World War buried in Belfast City Cemetery. So, anyway.
What is your definition of Greater Belfast?
Okay, Greater Belfast, without giving anything away, doesn't go as far as Dunmurry, doesn't go as far as White Abbey, wouldn't go as far as O'Neill's Road. No, actually, does go as far as O'Neill's Road.
Take in Cormorant, yeah.
Oh, yes. And on the, wouldn't go as far as Dunmurry, but would go as far as, say, the Comber Road. Okay?
I would go for 25.
25 cemeteries. pages, don't it? Right. There's 551 war graves in 13 cemeteries in Greater Belfast. Belfast City Cemetery obviously has the largest, followed by Milltown, followed by Dundonald Cemetery, and I haven't included St Elizabeth's in Dundonald, where there are another couple. Carmoney Cemetery with 47, Headland Graveyard with 10, Carmoney Church of Ireland Graveyard, both of their graveyards, with 7, Balmoral Cemetery with 3, Knockbreda Cemetery with 3, Knockbreda Church of Ireland Graveyard with 2, Greencastle Roman Catholic 1, Dundonald St. Dundonald is there with 1, Clifton Street 1, and Knock Burial Ground with 1. Does anyone even know where Knock Burial Ground is? Shut up, Eddie! There's always one know-it-all. Does anyone else know where Knock Burial Ground is? If you're coming along the Knock Road from the Newton Road, you come down into a dip, there's a set of traffic lights, and then you go up a hill, leads you onto the dual carriageway. There's a wee housing estate off on your right-hand side. That's where Knock Burial Ground is. It's up on the top of a hill, and it has a fantastic view over the city. Alright? If you can get in, it's locked. You have to get the keys from
You have to get permission to get in.
Well, if you ring up Dundonald, they'll let you in. Going to look at a couple of, and I know we are pressed for time.
We'd just like to read a book on the burials in Balmoral Cemetery.
Right.
I think it's
There's also a very good book called The Hidden Graveyard in Carmoney. Have you seen that? The Hidden Graveyard isn't actually that well hidden. It's the oldest, well, in Carmoney around the Anglican Church, there are graves around the church itself. Across the road there's the cemetery, which is fairly modern, has some World War II, some World War II, some World War I. But there's also then a part of the cemetery which is all covered by woods, or is surrounded by woods. They've done a lot of work recently just tidying it up. But it is fantastic. And you walk around and there are just some amazing headstones in there. Even if it's nothing to do with World War I, it's just a great wee place to have a down around. But it is very muddy. And it is very uneven. And it's very easy to go in your ear. Okay, a few examples from in and around Belfast. This is Private Thomas Clullow. He was born on 8th of October 1883, one of 6 children to James and Jane Clullow. Very strange surname for this part of the world. The family name originates in Lancashire. His father was the sexton in St John's Ladenbank Church of Ireland, which is now gone, I think. Probably a pub or something. He was a labourer when he enlisted with the South Lancashire Regiment on 20th of January 1903. Obviously, with the family coming from Lancashire, when he wanted to join it, that's where he went. Served in India and was awarded his Good Conduct Badge. He was discharged to the reserves in 1906, and in 1909 he married Eleanor Simpson, who was a weaver. They had 4 children. In 1911 they were living at 10 Renfrew Street, which is over Lisburn Road Village type area, I think. He was mobilised at Warrington on the 5th of August 1914, so one day after the start of the war. So that's his wife, widow. This information came to me from Stephen Thompson, who lives in Gilnaherk. He has an image of this man tattooed on his back. That's dedication. So he was in the reserves, South Lancashire.
Did he leave his wife out?
I don't know, I haven't seen the full work of art yet. I just wonder what it'll be like when he's 20 years older. Will Thomas have wrinkles that he didn't have when he died? So with being in the reserves, when war broke out, Royal Lancashire Regiment recalled into arms. Arrived in France on the 14th of August 1914. Received gunshot wounds to his left leg, sustaining fractures to the tibia and fibula on the 20th of September 1914 during the Battle of the Aisne. Or is that pronounced right? A-I-S-L-E, Aisne?
Yes.
Yeah.
I just never saw there's something there should be Aisne or something like that. And he spent 10 months at a hospital in Aberdeen. Medical reports stated that after the wounds had healed soundly, he walked spastically and the right side of his face displayed elements of palsy. Discharged as being no longer fit for war duty on the 6th of August 1915 with 12 years and 199 days of service. We're quite fortunate we do have a service record for this man, which is why I'm able to spill out so much information. He had 4 brothers who also served in the Great War. One of those dying at Rouen in 1918. On the first anniversary of his death, an in memoriam notice appeared in the Belfast Evening Telegraph. If you have lost somebody in the Great War, check the Belfast Telegraph. Okay, you can't get it in hard copy anymore, but on the anniversary of the man's death, the family put in memoriam notices, and they can be great because you might have 4 in memoriam notices which will give you maybe his brother and his brother's wife's name, or his mother's name and his mother's address. So it just gives you a bit more information as to where the family were living, maybe 2 years, 3 years, 4 years after his death. His wife put in this: so calmly he sleeps in God's holy acre, released from all sorrow, from toil and from pain. Forever he rests in the arms of his Maker, and humbly I pray I may meet him again. Interestingly, although he's described as the Church of Ireland on his service records, in the census returns that his father worked for an Anglican congregation or parish, his name appears on the Roll of Honour for Great Victoria Street Presbyterian Church. Why? Great Victoria Street Presbyterian Church, like a lot of Presbyterian churches, their rolls of honour were in some respects community rolls of honour. So basically the roll of honour in Great Victoria Street, which has over 700 names on it, basically that's Sandy Row. That's a memorial for Sandy Row. Sorry, yes?
I'm just going to say, is that the church that knocked down recently?
No, Great Victoria Street. It's the one which is just about opposite. It's next to what used to be the Apostolic Church, or close to the Apostolic Church, which used to be a Hebrew synagogue. It's opposite the Ulster Bank, the Angel Building.
Yes.
I'll show you a picture. It's a very nice church, proportion-wise. But there's no way it generated 700 men of fighting age. No way. That's Sandy Row, as a memorial for people from Sandy Row. And the Presbyterian churches very often would say men associated with the congregation rather than members of, because then they could bring in people who had maybe been in the Scouts or been in the BB or attended a coffee morning. Anyone. So that's Thomas Cligo. This next one, that's the in memoriam notice that Alan put in, still living in 10 Renfrew Street. The next one is Company Sergeant Major John McManus. Don't have as much information about him because there's no service record. Can't really find out an awful lot about him, but he was born in Ballinhinch around 1850. In the 1891 census, he was an army sergeant in Brentwood with his wife Hannah and their 6 children. The eldest child, Bernard, aged 10, had been born in the East Indies. So he was obviously a career soldier. Enlisted for war service, wait for it, this guy's buried in the Milltown Roman Catholic Cemetery. Enlisted for war service with the 9th Battalion Royal Irish Rifles. 9th Battalion Royal Irish Rifles was the West Belfast Volunteers in UVF. So here we've got a man, Roman Catholic, and he is giving orders to men from the UVF. Try telling that to the folks in the Shankill. Or the Falls. He held long service and good conduct medals for his time in the army. And the Commonwealth War Grave Records has his widow's addresses, 16 Mallorca Street in Belfast. I'm not sure where Mallorca Street is. Anyone know? No? Or even if it still exists. If you ever wondered where addresses or where streets were, LeninWiley.co.uk is a great website because they have different street directories that have been transcribed. So they have 1901, 1907, 1908, 1910, 1918. So you can track people in a certain way. You can find out where they were in 1918 then backtrack. If you can't find somebody on the census, let's say you look for him in the census looking for Yorker Street, he may have been there, but if you go to 1918 and find out that he was living in such and such, that might get, or if you go to 1910 and find out that in 1910 there was an army pensioner called John McManus living in Number in the Falls Road. Now, say, like, this might be the guy. Then you could check the census records for McManus, John, Falls Road, and you're more likely to get ahead. So the 4 crosses of sacrifice are from the 4 Belfast cemeteries. That'll be testing that in a minute. Okay, this is Engineer Lieutenant Hugh Todd, buried in Carmoney Cemetery. I actually can't have the test now because I'm giving you the answers. Born 23rd February 1884 in Carrickfergus, his parents were called Hugh and Matilda. He married Agnes Johnson on 14th December 1887 in Fort William Presbyterian Church. That information is coming from PRONI, from the General Records Office website, as did me finding his date of birth. Before the war, he was working, he'd been a career merchant seaman. He had worked with the Headland shipping line, which was one of the big shipping lines, certainly a lot around Belfast or around Ireland, and a lot of their ships were then became brought into the Royal Navy in the war. So he worked, and then he was working for Workman Clark, the other Belfast shipyard that everyone forgets about. There was more than one, not just Harland and Wolff, although Harland and Wolff was the biggest. He died serving with what's called the Special Service Squadron of the Royal Naval Reserve. And basically, that was a squadron that was made up of decoy battleships. These were built in Workman Clark's and in Harland and Wolff, and they were basically kit that were slammed together very quickly, and they were sent out to look like battleships so that it would draw the attention of U-boats away from merchant vessels. He died in Inverness Hospital. No idea why. Had he taken ill? Was he, had he been wounded? And he was brought home, and the funeral left from Brougham Street, I'm not quite sure how to pronounce that. He was 51 when he died. The guy buried in Milltown was 64 years old when he died. But I think there's a 68-year-old war fatality buried in Dundonald. So this is his Belfast Telegraph coverage of his funeral. He was obviously held in quite high regard because he got quite a few senior naval personnel, gun carriage with the naval guys behind the carriage, and the blue coats, which were the young, they were the equivalent of the day of the sea cadets. He was survived by his wife and 7 children, 2 daughters and 3 sons. Sorry, 3 daughters and 5 sons. 2 daughters and 5 sons. I can't count. I can't even read. And his 3 brothers. Again, a lot of the information I'm getting there, as well as the photo coverage of the actual funeral, there was a biography of him in the Belfast Telegraph, and that's where I'm getting this additional information from. So, coming back to earlier on, if you find you've got somebody, you can then go to the newspapers to see whether there was any mention of his funeral or of the circumstances or of his background. Belfast Newsletter, in my opinion, is particularly good for that, especially as it's online via Ancestry. It's not word searchable on Ancestry, but if you know that somebody died on the 3rd of July, I would have gone in and started on the 3rd of July and worked forward each day at a time to see if I could find any mention of him. And the last one, Corporal Richard Quinn, buried in Dundonald. This is a tragic case. Born in 1877, don't know the exact date, son of John and Mary Quinn, who had become a widow by 1901. In 1911, the family was living in Witham Street in the Victoria area, and John was a tramcar conductor with Belfast City Council. He enlisted at the start of the war. On the 23rd of June 1970, it appears that he never actually went to France, which is another important thing, is to be classified as a war fatality, you don't need to be in a war zone. If you're under the colours, if you're enlisted and you die, then you will still be accorded as being a war fatality. For example, John McManus never left Belfast, well, never left Belfast during World War I, probably, unless he went down to Bangor for a couple of day trips or something. But basically, he spent the war in Belfast. 23rd June, Quinn was admitted to the medical unit at Hollywood Barracks, suffering from gastritis, and he was later transferred to the unit at Victoria Barracks, which was in Belfast, on 19 September. Spent 9 weeks in hospital before being selected for transfer to Londonderry on the 24th of September. Despite declaring that he was too ill to be moved, he was transferred by motor ambulance to York Road railway station. And the Belfast Telegraph covered not only details of his death, but also of the inquiry that followed. On the 2nd of October, the Belfast newsletter reports that Quinn was taken to the buffet and left lying on the floor, writhing in agony. Bit of artistic license, maybe. Quinn was later put on the train to Londonderry, but he was dead by the time he reached Ballymena. Whilst he was writhing on the floor, he said, "As God is my witness, I really am sick." Who is it? Spike Milligan, the famous comedian. Do you know what I'm going to say? On his gravestone, "I told you I wasn't well," or something like that. But then that's Spike Milligan for you. So here we have, he's writhing in agony, and the cause of death was subsequently determined as acute pancreatitis. Belfast City Council, who had kept his job open for him, said, you know, whenever you come back from the war, your job's safe. Whether it would have been or not is another matter. They demanded an inquiry into the circumstances of his death because he was one of their men, and they wanted to know why one of their men was allowed to die on a train just outside Ballymena. Could have been worse. Could have been outside Antrim, but it was outside Ballymena. Belfast newsletter contained reports on the inquiry on the 4th, 5th and 13th of October. It did not, as far as I can find, report the conclusions of the inquiry, which leads me to suspect that the conclusions of the inquiry were never made public. But in the accounts, Sergeant Mabbutt, also of the Royal Irish Rifles, who had also been selected to be moved to hospital in Londonderry, reported to the inquiry that he heard an RAMC captain, who is named, but I'm not going to name him in case he's a relative, tell Quinn that if he did not stop writhing and get dressed, he would have him thrown in the clink. So this officer thought this guy was just a malingerer. He didn't want to be sent to Derry, or Londonderry. Other inquiry witnesses report that the railway transport officer queried whether Quinn was fit to travel, but was informed that 3 medical officers had certified that he was fit to travel. Those are the horrors of war to a certain extent. These are just 3 of the headlines from articles about Richard Quinn. First one is where the council, and that article wasn't just calling for inquiry, it was expressing sympathy to the family, and you get the people named who were involved in demanding the inquiry. The opening of the sworn inquiry, and then a report of the inquiry concluded. Professor Simers from Royal Victoria Hospital was one of the people called, and he was asked things like, if you had been there and you saw somebody writhing, what would you have done? Or would you have felt it was appropriate to still put him on the train? And to all these answers he was given, no, I would have taken him aside and given him a proper full medical examination. So I think that the report would have been highly critical of the medical staff, the medical officers, the officers from the Army Medical Corps who had said, this guy's just trying to swing the lead, get him on the train. Bit of a sad way to end the talk, but there you go.